Okay, so this is going to be the longest of the tutorials, and obviously you're going to hear a lot of more of my talking and the thought processes that I'm going to go through. Let's just center all that up there. Okay, so what we need to do here is define what's going to be worked on and when. What are the dependencies? What do we need to do first? And I said earlier on when I was showing this that this first or the second milestone would be all about white box, so all about finding the fun in our game, doing things really quickly, then followed by refining that again and again until we hit sort of our content complete and we've got a high level of quality, and then we can get rid of all the bugs. So this is all going to be about white boxing for the majority of the people here. In terms of gameplay, these two guys are going to be working on, so this is the gameplay programmer and the gameplay designer. They're going to be working on all of the combat. So we're going to say ranged and melee combat. And let's call it, I guess, the combat framework. No, let's call it white box, because that's what it is. It's that initial version. White box, ranged, and melee combat. The designer is going to be doing exactly the same thing. So based on what they've sort of determined is the best way to proceed in their design documents, they're going to start implementing that stuff. This will be very iterative. So through that week, they might do one particular thing of ranged combat. It might be a bow and arrow or something, and they'll do it like 3 or 4 times. They might do it again here, or they'll get to a point where they're happy with that, and then they'll try melee. It's called an agile methodology, and a methodology is just the way that you're working within these teams. And speaking of the teams, what happens here, we usually break people down into what are called strike teams. So they are working together in a collaborative way to get this work done. And the other person in this strike team will be the animator, because he'll be iterating on these basic animations that he's done to help them define what the combat is all about. And this is the player character, this is the enemy characters, all that kind of stuff. Now, speaking of that, obviously we need enemies doing something. So I'm going to add this guy doing white box AI. So he's working with these guys in delivering them enemy characters based on sort of the white box versions of things that we can interact with, but maybe they don't attack yet. Maybe they just sort of can walk around and we can attack them, and so we're focusing on our player combat more than we are with the enemy, because AI takes such a load of work. In fact, it takes so much work that I'm just going to copy and paste it right to the end of the project for this guy. And we'll go through the different stages, and it's not going to be white box at these points. It'll be just AI. He'll probably do other stuff as well. I mean, AI is a big scope of work, but we'll need to split his talent. Probably with camera. Camera is another very important part of sort of combat and gameplay and the whole thing, especially that we're working in a third person. So boom, look, we've filled out sort of. We'll change this, but we've defined what he's doing for the rest of the project. So what we're going to do with these guys is we're now going to take that initial white box stage, and then we're going to break it down and make it better in each way. So I'll just take that whole block and copy it and then paste it to each one of these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get them focused. So it's not going to be white box anymore, because they've defined a lot of their combat back here. But they are going to focus on one type of combat. So a major deliverable at the end of this milestone will be ranged combat. There we go. And it's not going to be white box. And then the major deliverable for the milestone of that will be melee combat. MELL. And then I'll just copy that. And just paste the whole thing. There we go. So once they've, by the time they've got to this point, not only have they defined what the combat's like, they've really iterated on it and made it a lot of fun to do. And the enemy by this point, will probably be attacking us as well, and we'll have a lot of good stuff. After they do this, they'll probably go into a period where they're not actually adding much else. They're just refining it and making it a lot better. And then there'll be a final period where they really polish things up. So what I'm gonna because I know that this last milestone before we lock down is all about polish. It's not really about adding more content. It's about making sure that everything is just so sweet. Polish, and that'll go for the artist, which I'm going to define in a second as well. So again, white box, ranged, melee. We don't want to do melee again. We actually want to iterate on all of this. So we've really started to nut things down. So here we're just going to, I guess we actually do have a few other things. I'll just leave that as combat at this point in time. So all combat. Copy, paste, and let's give it all a color. Because they're all very much related. So this is a strike team that's consistently working throughout the project on the one system. Let's make it purple. There. Now I'm also going to select everything and put boxes around it, just so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, that's sort of related to that, so I'll just copy that over there. So what are the level guys doing? Well, they're doing a similar thing. They're working together, but they're, instead of focused on the combat mechanics, they're going to be focused on the actual game level and the gameplay. So this might be the quests and all that kind of thing. So again, first up, we're doing a white box level design. So we'll just go white box levels, quests. So he's working on the sort of structure of what the player does there, when the combat happens. So he's not actually defining how the combat works. He's just defining when we're going to have combat encounters, and when we're going to find that key, and when we're going to open that chest and power up our armor and all that kind of thing that keeps the game interesting. And at the same time, the level artist will be whiteboxing all the level components. He may be doing props, probably not. He'll be pretty focused, I think, on creating all the pieces, all the little level sections that the level designer will use to really flesh out those gameplay spaces. And we've got a single level here, so let's just call it level. And there's going to be multiple quests, if I recall. And again, prop artist, same kind of thing. He's creating all the crates and the pickups and power-ups and all that kind of stuff. He could start doing VFX with the combat team, but to be honest, let's let them flesh it out before we go and sort of interfere in that process. So I'm going to put all these guys together at the same color as well, and they can be green. And again, same process. We'll refine the plan as we go, but they'll go into the next stage, which is actually doing the first pass. So the level guy's going to start texturing all his terrains, and this guy's going to start actually defining, creating all those normal maps and doing all the actual work. Because now in this stage we defined how many we're going to be able to make, then we plan for the next milestone, and then we actually start implementing. And again, there'll be multiple iterations and making it better and better until we get to a final stage of polish. I'll copy that, put it at the beginning of each one of those. So yeah, this last milestone is just polishing stuff up that's been made better. Sound engineer, similar thing. He how are we going to use him? Okay, he's probably going to be focused a lot with this combat team, to be honest. He could do the sound effects. No, they need to define things. So what we're going to do is we're going to make him focus on the environment, music. So the atmos or atmospheric sort of sounds. So he might put in triggers as you run past a swamp or a pond. There's sort of like crickets and frogs going, as well as the general music and tone. So when you're in combat, we want a really sort of upbeat, pacey music, and when we're just exploring, it needs to be a little bit more relaxed. So he's going to define all those kind of things. He might actually work on some sound effects, initial sort of white box sound effects, and let's call that all white box as well, because it could be just placeholder music as he's composing it up. I'll make him slightly different colour actually. There, he can be that colour. Because although these guys are working closely together, this guy is sort of doing his own thing at the moment based on what they go and what they're doing. In the second pass, he'll probably do the first pass iteration on a lot of the combat stuff. So, it's a ranged combat focus, so we'll put ranged combat effects. So here we'll put combat effects generic. Then we'll focus on ranged. We'll still probably do a bit of background music, but he's probably got a lot of stuff to do. In fact, no, he's had a pass at background music, so we'll focus him on ranged combat sound effects, and then on melee combat sound effects. So you can see that the whole team is kind of working together on things and making them better. And then at the end, he's probably going to do an iteration on the sound again. So it's not white box anymore. He's going back and he's refining things, and just a general fix up or polish on these combat effects. So again, it's just working things over and over again. I say it and I repeat myself a lot because it is so important that we build build a really good foundation and then just improve and improve within the time period we've got to deliver a quality product. And of course, at the end, it's just all about polish. All the assets are in, all the sound effects are in. We're not going to add anything else. We're just going to work on what we've got and make it sound even better for all the combat effects and music. Okay, so we've pretty much nearly defined the whole project. I will go to a second pass for this because I know I haven't even included the HUD and the UI system. So, I'm not quite sure yet. I've done it already, but I'm not quite sure at this point in time when I'm thinking through this process of where I'm going to put those things. So the IT guy's tools. So he's going to be doing his DAT consistently. Probably not on the first day. He might be helping with the build machine. To make sure that the builds are all getting out, because there's not a lot to test yet. The first week they're going to be starting to define things, but the builds will sort of come as that happens. So he could be working on version control stuff as well. So version control is a way to back up your files, and if you accidentally mess something up, what can we call this? QA systems. Let's call it QA systems, which include things like version control. So what that is you go, if you accidentally mess something up and you save over your file, you go, oh my god, I'm going to have to recreate that. Well, no, you're not going to, because you have a version control system in place, which is very important. So you can roll back to yesterday's work, or a week ago, or a month ago, or in this case, a couple of weeks ago, and make sure that you haven't lost anything. So in the same respect, I'm going to have one of the coders helping to define that version control. So again, QA systems center, and let's just color those both in like that. And then once work starts happening in the second week, then he can start doing his DATs, his daily acceptance tests, which we've defined down here. I might quickly pause the video and write those in because they're going to take a little bit of time. Okay, so I've just defined what those things mean: daily acceptance tests, milestone, code lock-off, when that happens, technical design, etc., etc., just so we have a key so people can understand what that means. And I've sort of coloured in these boxes and these guys just to make it a little prettier to look at. So what was I up to? So we were going to do the daily acceptance test. So let's make it the same colour as that one, call it DAT, dis and DAT. So this is going to continue to happen right throughout the whole process. There's going to be daily acceptance tests. So if I just copy that and copy it into the whole thing, and like I said, that is basically testing the game every day and making sure that it works, so you can deliver it to the other guys and they can continue working and upgrading it. I'm also going to add in here, I'm going to break that down and merge that one. So it's MAT, milestone acceptance test, and then select those cells and remerge that. Why I did that and separated it, I mean, it's part of that QA process, but it's a very important sort of thing to define that he's going to be, throughout that whole week, everything's locked down. These guys aren't adding anything. Like, they could be creating content, but they're not adding it to the build. They're not submitting it to the version control software so that the build gets made with, you know, the new content during this period, because we want to lock everything down and get build stability, fix any bugs, all that kind of thing as we go for the delivery of the milestone. And this guy's doing the milestone acceptance test every day and making sure that that happens. So I'm going to go through and add that to each one of the periods. Okay. One thing that I've missed out on is, you know, when we've done the sort of like the white box versions of these characters, and I might actually colour that a little bit different. This is mainly animation, so the animator's doing animation, but he hasn't actually built the final versions of the characters. Like the level artist has got his white box and then he's starting to, you know, build out the look of those things and the props. This guy hasn't done that yet, so we've got to find him some time. So unfortunately we're going to have to take a bit of time off him. So if I unmerge those cells and, you know, give him 2 weeks to sort of work with those guys, he might still be supporting them in the next week, but we need him to start building the final version of those characters. So in this one I'm going to call it the player model, because he's our most important guy, isn't he? And merge and center that and give it the same color. So this is, you know, going through and making that player model look really nice. And then same thing here for the enemy character. So we're going to paste that in there, copy paste, enemies, or enemy model. So what we're going to do here is we don't have a lot of time to build lots and lots of enemies, so we're going to build a single enemy type, and then we're going to change, we're going to make variations of that. So all the range guys and all the melee guys that are enemy have sort of the same height and shape, but we're going to differentiate it by just giving them different visual things, and obviously the weapons they're holding, bows and arrows and all that kind of thing. But generally we don't want lots of different shapes and sizes in an enemy because we just don't have time to build it. And further down the line, as he's focusing on melee, he'll have a week here. And these might get merged, you know, he works on the models a bit, he does some animations as required for these guys. But as long as the time has been defined on the schedule, we know he's got to do that. So here he might do the enemy variations, stuff like that. Let's all give it some borders. And again, you know, this is a period where he's going over things and iterating on them, so he needs to do the same thing for his models. So I'll actually give the player himself a bit of a polish, and then we'll give the enemy some polish. So hopefully this guy's a bit of a gun, because his time's just been not halved but reduced quite a bit to do all the final versions of these. And you know, these guys may help as well, but you know, they've got so much to do with the level and the props anyway, depending on, obviously, on the scope that's defined during the defining stage. And what else are we missing? Oh yes, I mentioned before the HUD. The HUD, the UI, the front end, as you come into the game, all those lovely 2D things that make it feel nice. Where are we going to do this? You know, we've got our UI guys here, but we haven't defined anywhere. They're just sort of busy doing stuff. Ho-hum, this is where scope comes into it. We're going to have to take a hit on a little bit of our combat, and we do iterate on it quite a bit, so you know, maybe we can use a period. You know, it's important that the designer is working on his stuff, so we're going to use the coder. We're going to use the coder and the artist up front to work on HUD things. So I'm going to just change the color briefly to that, whatever, and I'm going to get them to work more. Obviously the first is the white box version of the HUD and the UI and the front end, all that kind of stuff. Front end user interface is what UI means. We need to put that down on our little terms here. Okay, so I added in the key definitions for user interface and HUD, just so that anybody that randomly looks at this roadmap can see what that is. So we've defined the white box HUD here, but we need some art support on it. And this guy's already defined his white box props, and he's got quite a few iterations on that, so I'm going to have him also focus on doing the artwork for the front end and the UI. And between that coder and that artist, they should be able to use the game design document as their base. Even without the game designer working on the UI, they should be able to implement something at a first stage, at a white box stage, and just ask this guy every now and then how he thinks it's going. But of course, then we need to make this look better. But these guys got to get onto their melee and range combat as well. So at different milestones, your strike teams might mix it up a little bit, and people go from one strike team to the other, whatever happens to be the priority at that time. So we obviously need to iterate on these two things and then polish them. We're not going to have that much time. The designer definitely. What I'm doing here? I'm back and forth between which resource I've got and my task. And what I've failed to do is a thing called freeze the pane to cause me less pain. So if I select that whole column and I go up into view and I go over to this freeze panes, what I can do is freeze the first column. You can do the top row and other bits, but for this purpose we're just going to do freeze the first column. When I do that, whenever I scroll about, that first column does not scroll with it, so it stays where it is, and as I move through my timeline I can instantly recognize who's working on what. Okay, I've had a quick look at this again and I've changed my mind. I think it's really important that the designer has a go at doing the front end early on in the project. So I'm going to put him to work with his strike team, with the artist and the coder, on all those front end and user interface elements, because he has had a go at initially creating the quests. I'm going to give him a little break, have him focus on something that needs to be done quite early on, and then he can go back to his level quests and iterate and polish on them, because we really need to get this stuff done. So after that, we're going to need a bit of visual effects. We haven't really added any visual. We've got sound effects happening, but when swords hit or explosions happen, we need those particles and all those nice things. And obviously that's going to be the VFX artist. So I'm going to focus him, since he's built the white box props in this particular milestone, and then he's focused on UI elements. I'm going to then get him to focus on the white boxing of all the VFX or visual effects in the game. And once again, I probably need to add these things in here. VFX, SFX for sound effects, visual effects, sound effects. This is probably a decent time for the visual effects artist to start looking at all those little sparks and things happen as swords clang and the waterfalls in the environment and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get him to start working on the visuals for all those things, or the VFX. That's quite a big period of time, but I think there's probably a few things to do. Possibly could still be working on props depending on how much VFX there is, and the VFX might be props as well. So from this point onwards, he's going to be spread a little thin. He's going to be doing VFX as well as design, and hopefully the designer has a little more time. The level environment artist has a little more time to help with props. So again, collaboration, and let's have him polish those level stuff. Collaboration in making sure things get done, and having people that are over more than just one discipline. I think we're nearly there. I don't think we have much else to actually define here. I did have in my original assessment a boss character, and I'm going to talk to you why I got rid of that. And it's part of project planning. It comes down to scope. There simply wasn't enough time to do a unique boss character. We're going to do variations on our enemies, but to do a boss character requires a whole sort of combat system, usually for that boss, not so much for the player, but how the boss works, a whole set of sort of AI on how the boss is going to behave, and it just seemed too much for our prototype. So we're just going to focus on having better melee and ranged combat with what we've got. So this might be we actually get an extra variation on our ranged or melee combat enemy, so we have more sort of enemy dynamics to contend with, which would be really good. Yeah, but other than that, I think I've pretty much come to the end of laying out the project. So what I'm going to do in the next video is just finish things off. I'm going to add our milestone sort of dates and our today date, so we can see the progress as we're going, and really define this back end, this quality assurance period.